Thank you for joining us on She's with the Band.
On this week's episode, we will explore how Sue broke into the entertainment industry as a teenager and was suddenly surrounded by the world's greatest music icons, how she appeared on one of the most popular TV shows of the time, meeting the Beatles, early ghostwriting for the Stones, and so much more.
She's with the band. She's with the band.
This podcast is brought to you by Dover Street Productions and may contain some content that some listeners might find offensive. Let's begin. So, Sue, you have had an incredibly exciting life alongside some of the most famous people and incredible people in living memory. Did you always know that you wanted to work in the entertainment industry?
I kind of fell into it. I had nothing planned in my life because I couldn't wait to leave school at 16 years old. Nobody went into higher education because you could do what you wanted in the 60s. It was like your world was your lobster, as they say. Whatever you wanted to try, whether it was fashion, whether it was music, whether it was film, anything, you just went for it. So I'd left school, and with my great friend, my oldest friend, Marilyn, we decided that we wanted to go to modelling school. I told my mother that's what I wanted to do, and she said, on the condition that you go and take a secretarial course, because it was a very short modelling course, so you'll have something to fall back on. And so I said, okay, fine. So off we went to modelling school after we'd left, I guess, in September of 62. We did the modelling course, which was great fun. It was Upper Grosvenor Street off Bond Street. And all the models in those days used to carry these great big modelling bags because they had to provide their own accessories. They weren't provided for. They had to come equipped for all seasons in that model bag. So I purchased one of these to look the part, and I'd walk up and down Bond Street with my cheekbones sucked in, carrying my big modelling bag, thinking I looked the bee's knees. And then we went off to Marlborough Gate in Lancaster Gate, which was the most brilliant secretarial college, because we were there with all the naughty Debs that had got kicked out of finishing school for having the boys in their rooms when they weren't meant to, and smoking, and anything they weren't meant to do, they did. And it was just brilliant. And the thing was, I was very good at it for some reason, because I hated my school and I didn't work and didn't pass any exams. And one of the girls in my class was the daughter of Johnny Stewart, who produced Top of the Pops. I was there with a girl called Judy Gould, who became quite a good author, I remember. I was there with the Tate and Lyle heiress. I was there with some other heiress, I don't know, but we were all very naughty. And all we did was laugh all day. And when you did your speed typing test, you sat there waiting for the music to start. You didn't know what the music was going to be. And you sat in this round, so you were girls facing you as well. And the typewriter was there on this wooden thing, and you were ready to go. Then the music started the first time it happened, and it was the William Tell Overture. Well, you know how fast the William Tell Overture is. You couldn't type to that. We were just, Marilyn and I were on the floor, just eyes just streaming, and Mrs. Williams just couldn't control me ever. And she was from up north. Her wig used to go all askew when she got all aerated. She used to get her ruler, which can you imagine today wouldn't be allowed, and she used to rap me over the knuckles. She used to go, shut up, Miss Morton, shut up. She just couldn't control me. And it was brilliant. I did so well. I got 120 words a minute in shorthand. I got about 70, 80 in typing, which was brilliant because I went on to be a journalist. So who knew how well it would serve me?
Tell us how it all unfolded for you to become the incredibly successful music journalist that you became.
So what was kind of a little different about this place is because it was right across from the park, so it was in a beautiful situation. But it was sort of on the edge of Bayswater, because it was Lancaster Gate. And then round the corner, we used to go to lunch to the Brothel, which was a restaurant in the basement and a brothel upstairs, which was very convenient because the law school was round the corner. So the boys also would come and have their lunch there. But then they would disappear upstairs more often than not when we went back to college. And then sometimes at lunchtime, I used to jump on the bus and go over to Hanover Square because that's where Vogue House was. And there was this cafe called the Café de la Paix, this restaurant, where they all used to go from Vogue House, all the models and photographers. And I met lots of interesting people there. So that was fun. There was, what we also used to do, they had all the coffee bars in Soho on the ground floor, and a lot of them had kind of a club in the basement where you'd dance. So you'd have La Poubelle and the Kilt. There was the Whiskey, but that didn't have a coffee bar. But you had all these places. And so you used to go and dance. That's what we used to do. And there were some great dancers down there in the daytime. And that was fun as well. Anyway, one night, Marilyn and I decided to go to the Last Chance, which was a club in Oxford Street. And I'm not sure why we decided to go that night. I don't know if it's because we knew that Ready, Steady, Go had scouts there, or we just decided to go. It was not somewhere where we frequented at all. And there was a scout from Ready, Steady, Go there, which was like the hot show at the time, went out live on Friday nights. I think at 6:30, because I think the news was on at 6. And there's a scout invited Marilyn and I to be on the show in, I don't know, 2 weeks' time, because they had this little segment each week for maybe, I don't know, a couple of months. It wasn't a fixture, where they used to get 4 pop stars, male, I think they were always male, and then 4 people from the public to do this little mime thing to whatever record they had. So we were quite excited about this until they sent us all the details, and the song was called Please Don't Talk to the Lifeguard, and we were asked to bring a bikini. At the last minute, all this chatter was going on. What should we wear? What should we this? What should we that? And then Marilyn pulled out. She said, I can't do it. I went, why? She said, my mother would kill me. My mother would absolutely kill me if she saw me on television. Well, not me, game for anything. I told nobody. Off I went. And I had this little, it was a black, basically a black bikini with black and white check on the front panel here. What wasn't too revealing. It wasn't like a balconette. And there I was, and the 4 pop stars. So there was Bilk, who wasn't exactly a pop star. He had a jazz band, and he always wore a bowler hat, and he played the clarinet. There was Jez Conrad, who was very pretty. And there was Philip Laurie, who was actually an actor. He played Elsie Tanner's son in Coronation Street. And then there was Duffy Power. And then the 4 girls were in front of them, and they were all in 1920s bathing suits, the men, those itchy long wool things. And then the cameras rolled, and then we were going, please don't talk to the lifeguard, please. That's all I can remember. Anyway, I didn't win, which was no great big deal. But I got the biggest prize because I was approached after the show by, I think it was Frances Hitchens, who was the producer of Ready, Steady, Go. Because Vicky Wickham was the editor. Vicky Wickham was major in the music business. She managed Dusty in the end because they were great friends, Gladys Knight and the Pits. I mean, she was a major figure in the music business there. And they kind of liked me, and they said, look, we need somebody for 2 weeks to temp. Would you be interested? Right. So, of course, I said yes. And then the most awful thing happened. I got home because I hadn't told anyone where I'd been, and my mother was apoplectic because my grandfather had turned on the news that night to watch the news. And the television wasn't turned off after the 6 o'clock news. And there he saw his granddaughter. My mother went berserk. And she made it her business. Every 10, 12 years, she'd always managed to bring up the disgrace I brought on the family by appearing on television in a bikini. So that didn't go down very well. So I had my 2 weeks, which I loved, obviously, and the Beatles were on. For the first time the Beatles were ever on was when I was there during that 2 weeks. So that was a highlight. I really got a taste for this music. I thought, oh, this is for me. I like this. So anyway, I got a job with this outlet, so to speak, of an advertising agency. It was a poster agency in New Burlington Street, one office. It was the most boring job ever, so boring. And I thought, I've got to get out of here. And that's when I found this ad in the Evening Stand, the back of the Evening Standard, where they used to advertise a lot of interesting jobs. And it said, secretary to the editor of Boyfriend magazine. I thought, oh. And it was literally across the street in Regent Street. So I went for the job and I got it. And what was interesting, you went up in this rickety old lift, the ones that they pull the lattice gates across and they sort of shake all the way up. And I met the editor, Ken Walmsley, who was Scottish, but he was also profoundly deaf. So basically, one had to listen for him more than speak for him, because if you wanted to make a telephone call, you made the call. It was quite often to Jack Hutton. Jack Hutton was the editor of Melody Maker, and Jack was the nicest guy. And he made Melody Maker what it was. And then Jack or whoever would give the answer to you that you then had to repeat to Ken. But the thing is that if he felt that you were taking too long to receive the answer he was waiting for, he would be so paranoid and think that you were talking about him. And so the setup of the Boyfriend offices was interesting. What was also interesting, I thought, actually, about the Boyfriend, the staff situation, apart from the editor, all the editorial staff were female. Whereas in my next 2 jobs as a music journalist, I was the only female. They were all male. So it was very girly in the editorial office of Ken stood no chance with all of us, actually. And so it was so ghastly, this place, I can't tell you. So cold. We used to type with fingerless gloves and our, in the winter, and our coats, our scarves, just about see our mouths and noses and everything. So you walked down the corridor, out the lift. Reg, the publisher, and his PA, had the art director, David May. And then you had the terrible twins. You had Roger and Paul, the Janowski twins, who were the naughtiest twins ever. And opposite the art room was the loo, the ladies' loo, which was convenient for them because we were the butt of all their jokes. They were just wonderful and naughty, very talented. They were very talented. Anyway, and then you came to the editorial room, this great big square room. And Shirley, the telephonist, as you entered the room, was there with her big board, because you plugged in those days, no switches. Phone rang, you plug in and go, hello, Boyfriend magazine, how may I help you? And they'd go, can I speak to so-and-so? Just a moment, please. Then another plug would then connect you to that person. And then Maggie Coomey was on the right hand as you went in. She kind of ran the show, really, I guess. I don't know what her title was, but Maggie went on to great things. In fact, most of Boyfriend's employees went on to great things. It was a great stepping stone. She became editor of Hello. She launched Hello here because she worked for Ola in Spain. Then next to their office, then there was the 2 journalists. So Maureen O'Grady sat at one desk when I was there, and Penny Valentine, who was a very well-known journalist, Penny. Penny had just left. And then Mick was our new office boy who took over from Terry, who went on to better things. They gave him a column called Time to Take the Mick. And he went on and became Rod Stewart's PR. So the last office of the editorial suite was Eve. Eve was our sub-editor, and she was Scottish, incredibly pretty with red hair and turquoise blue eyes. And she was going out with Tony, who was our photographer's assistant. So we had a lot of girl power in those offices. in the editorial offices. The only males were Ken, our editor, and our office boy, Mick. So that's how it all started. And then the Stones had their own column, and I ghosted for them. That was my really first proper job as a reporter. But they were often up at the office because they were always hungry. They never had any food. They were always scrounging for food. We had our own photographic studio, which was on another floor. So we had everybody come in, everybody that came down to London, because they were always coming from Manchester, Liverpool, the Midlands, wherever, from abroad. Whoever was in, we were one of the first stops, had to be interviewed by Boyfriend magazine, or if they had a record to promote or whatever. And another feature was Boyfriend of the Week, where we had all these very attractive young men be our Boyfriend of the Week. And we used to just pick them off the street, really. We just walk down the street and go, oh, you look all right, you know. Do you want to be Boyfriend of the Week? We used our friends and because there was no budget for anything, to illustrate some of the stories, not only did they have the storyboard one, the Spanish one, they would have a feature that they had outside. They'd buy in stories. It could have been on gambling. It could have been on anything, really. And they used all of us as the models because they couldn't afford models. I mean, I remember they had me standing by a roulette wheel looking like I was in a casino and barely got a thank you for it. And then there was the big bumper Christmas issue, you know, everybody was in, and we always threw a big Christmas party. It was at this restaurant in Bond Street when the Stones came this particular year. Oh, I think I have got a feeling I think one of them threw a flower pot at Reg. They had a bit too much to drink, and everybody was very naughty with the twins, and you know, there were lots of things going on, and we just didn't care. The biggest worry of the day was, well, which party are we going to go to tonight? Because the record companies were always throwing parties, the PRs were always throwing parties. It was mainly the record companies, though, because they had all the money and everything like that. And I get really nostalgic because it was just such a great time. We had such fun. I mean, we laughed a lot. And we kind of came up with them. They were nobodies, a lot of them that came down. I remember Tom Jones walking into Boyfriend magazine and for the first time that he'd come down to London. Boyfriend magazine at the time was the teeny bopper magazine at the time, because they didn't just have articles about pop stars. It was for the well-rounded teenager. And because we had our own photographic studio, when anybody came into town, could be their first record release. They'd come from up north, on Jarrabunk from up north. We were the first stop. Get their photograph taken, get an article written up, and they had their first piece of PR, often with us.
So you've mentioned that the Beatles came through, the Stones came through. Who else did you have that would sort of stop in?
Everybody, you name it, they came. There wasn't anybody that didn't come to Boyfriend magazine. Everybody came. Oh, and when I was at Boyfriend magazine, they had a column. I don't know what it was called. It was the Stones had their own column in Boyfriend magazine. And each week, a different Stone took it in turns to write the column. Well, of course, they didn't write the column, did they? So he made me in charge. That was one of my first things. Ken made me in charge. I ghosted their column. So it would go something like, it was just so banal, this whole thing. It would be, hello, it's Mick here, just making myself some bacon and eggs for breakfast and put the kettle on for a cup of tea. Oh, just a minute, somebody's at the door. I made all this up. Oh, it's Brian, his pop, because they all lived in one room. I think they were still in Edith Grove. Oh, it's Brian, forgotten his keys or left something behind. And then it was, oh, well, we're just thinking of doing whatever, and Keith and I have just written this song and we're thinking of recording it. I just made it up as I went along. And then the next week it would be somebody else. So that was quite fun. And I had been put in charge when I joined Boyfriend magazine and started as the editor's secretary. My job of the day, the big job of the day, because I don't think he really had an awful lot for a secretary to do, apart from the fact that I used to have to make his phone calls. But he had Maggie with him, lovely Maggie Coomey, who was his right hand. So she kind of did most of that stuff for him. So he didn't really have an awful lot for a secretary to do, except one vital thing that the secretary had to do was to address the readers' letters. There used to be a lot of readers' letters, particularly as the Stones had their own column. And that was my job. Well, I started looking at these readers' letters and I thought, oh, God, these are so boring. I might have done a few at the beginning. I thought, oh, this isn't for me. What am I going to say to these people? Well, you can imagine what the letters were like. So I used to stuff them all in my desk drawer. We had those horrible, all the furniture was secondhand. Those brown desks that had had 6 previous owners with 2 drawers one side and 2 drawers another, all scarred on the top and everything, cigarette burns and God knows what, sitting under my 1-bar wall heater with my fingerless gloves on and my hat and my coat and my scarf. It was so bloody cold in there. And I thought, well, how am I going to get rid of these letters? Because they kept piling up. There were so many letters. And Jim, who was the janitor, there was a furnace in the basement where he used to burn all the rubbish. So I used to put them in a pile. Poor old Jim. I used to get all the letters when no one was looking. And I used to give them to Jim, and he used to burn them. Oh, the incinerator, it was called the incinerator. He used to burn them in the incinerator for me. And if he thought I was looking idle, Ken, that with nothing much to do, he used to come out and he used to say, "Get on with your readers' letters, Sue," like that. Like it was my sole purpose there. And after I ghosted these columns, that was my trial, I think, ghosting. I mean, a baby could have done these columns. That's when I was made a reporter, and that's when my salary went up from £9 10 shillings a week to £11. And you had to be very careful because Annie, Ken's daughter, she was very pretty. Annie worked in the art room. So you had to be careful around Annie. But, oh yes, when Shirley had her lunch hour, her lunch break, somebody had to be on the switchboard because not everybody took their lunch break at the same time. And it was Jim the janitor. Jim wasn't quite the full packet. Oh God, it was dreadful at times. And one time it was so bad because he cut off, taken the plug out from the caller to put it in to Reg, the publisher, and he got all his wires crossed and he cut him off. Oh God, Reg came storming in. I don't know who he was speaking to. He came storming in, and poor old Jim was all of a dither. He just couldn't cope. He just couldn't cope with it. Well, I'm sure I couldn't have coped with it either.
Can you tell us a few differences in what it was like hanging out with the Stones and in the Beatles at this time?
They were good, the Stones. They were very accessible. Much more so than the Beatles, not because the Beatles didn't want to be accessible, but by then they were so mega, they were massive, they couldn't put their nose out the door without being mobbed. And don't forget, they'd come from Liverpool to London. London was not their habitat, whereas the Stones, it was. They'd been in and out of London for years, the clubs, they're playing at the clubs, and they were always on the street. You'd see them, it was no big deal. Sure, people were interested in them, but they weren't going to be mobbed and have 500 people running down the street. I mean, I used to go shopping with Brian in Carnaby Street because they had all the cool menswear stores there, like John Stevens. And Brian they all liked their clothes, but Brian in particular, he was a bit of a dandy, and he had a penchant for cashmere polo necks. And Jaeger, only maybe half a dozen years ago, was on Regent Street. That's where their store was. And they had a menswear department downstairs in the basement. He liked to go in there and have a look around, and he'd buy his cashmere sweaters there. And he liked it because it was very courtly in there. He'd walk in, they'd go, "Oh, good afternoon, Mr. Bryan," like they did on Savile Row. He liked that. So I used to go, shopping with him, and I did things with the Stones that, like for the day with Bill's son, Stephen, he was very small, Stephen. I don't even think he was 8 years old. I think he was younger than that. And I remember Bill phoning me and saying, "I'm going to take Stephen to the Natural History Museum. Do you want to come with?" He wasn't asking me to come as a pal, but he was happy he knew it would be written up. Their PR knew that. They had the greatest PR, the Rolling Stones, and Les Perrin, an older guy, always with a cigarette in his mouth. He was the nicest guy. I dealt with some of the nicest PR guys in those days. There were some really special ones like Keith Goodwin and Ray Williams. They were gentlemen. They were young guys, but they were brought up nicely, and they treated you with respect. And yes, sure, they needed us. They needed us in a way more than we needed them. There were some things that you think, oh my goodness, that wouldn't have happened at any other time. And there was a coffee bar. There always seems to be a coffee bar downstairs to everywhere. And so one day he said to me, "Oh, pop round. I want you to listen to something." So I went, "Oh, okay, fine." So I popped round. And I was sitting outside, not in his office, it must have been a nice day, sitting at one of the little tables outside. And he said, "Hang on a second." He goes up to the office and he brings a record player down, a record player. So it's not electric or plugged in, you have to wind it up. And he put it on the table and he said, "I want you to listen to this." And he put this on and it was really different. And I went, "Well, who is this?" He said, "Oh, you won't have heard of them, but you will be hearing of them. They're called Simon and Garfunkel." And he must have played me, well, because I looked it up. I thought, well, what was first, Homeward Bound or Sound of Silence? Sound of Silence was first. That's what I must have heard sitting on the pavement in the coffee bar before anyone else had heard it. And there's little things like that. I'd been to a club, for example, one of the, not the music business clubs, but the inn clubs at the time, like where they hung out. And I remember one night being on Chelsea Bridge with John Lennon after somewhere in the middle of the night, must have been at a club, and there's a tea and a pie stall where all the cabbies stopped. Tea and a pie, where nobody could see you in the middle of the night, so you wouldn't get mobbed. I'm sure it's there to this day where the cab is stopped. There are all little nice things like that. That the guys were really nice and they treated you very nicely, I've got to say. It was before all the real madness with the drugs and everything like that. So
Quite incredible life that you were living at quite a young age. Now, obviously, being in your late teens, early 20s, relationships, dating, that sort of thing is obviously on a lot of people's minds. So can you tell us a bit about how people, especially in the circles that you worked in and lived with and worked with, can you tell us a bit about how people would ask each other out and approach each other for those types of situations?
there was nothing done formally. It was like you kind of knew, and they'd go, "Oh, are you going to be at Ready City Go on Friday? Or are you going to Decca's party or Pie's party or EMI's party?" And you go, "Yes." And they'd go, "See you there." Well, you kind of knew you were on a promise sort of thing, if you wanted to be, really. I mean, nobody actually said, "Would you like to come out for dinner?" No pop star or musician said, "Would you like to come out for dinner?" Normal people said, say, "Would you like to come out for a drink? Would you like to come out for dinner?" But no, that didn't happen that way. And then you'd just go off to another party. You'd go to somebody was having a party, or you would go to a club. More often than not, it was a club where you wouldn't really talk because the music was so loud. There was not a lot of conversation that went on. And that's how it happened with the musicians and the artists. That's how it happened. And then some people had certain people that it was accepted that when they came down to London or flew in from the States, they would hook up with that person. It was kind of an ongoing thing. You knew to be there, quite honestly. Well, I can only tell you with the girls, the three of us who were my closest friends in that situation, which was Maureen O'Grady, Penny Valentine, and myself. We were very friendly. We had a really good laugh. It was just fun. And it was such a different thing to do. I mean, most of my girlfriends were married by the time they were 21. There I was, rocking and rolling. I was the envy of everyone. And all my mother used to say to me years later, you see, if you wouldn't have mixed with all those undesirable people, she used to say, you could have been married by now. And I go, look at them all. They all got divorced. And I used to come in at 5 o'clock in the morning, and I'd been driving her car, and she had no idea where I was. There were no mobile phones. And I remember I'd come in, I'd take my shoes off at the front door, you'd sneak up the stairs. And one day, there she was, looming over the banister, just beside herself. She was beside herself from sheer terror, thinking that I'd crashed the car. She was screaming at me and crying at me. And I went into her bedroom. She had all the phone directories on the bed. We used to have these things called A to Zs. They were these great big things, you know. You had A to D and then E to... She had all of them on the bed. And I go, who are you calling? What's she going to find in the... She had a lot of panicky moments, I have to say.
How did your younger sister feel about you doing all of this?
Well, I think she thought she was almost 4 years younger than me. I think that she felt it was very exciting. And she was there when the riots were in Paris, 1968.
Oh, wow.
Yes, I was, and it wasn't until I went to visit her in Paris that we became close. Because at that age, I was 18, she was 14. But I do remember one of the Beatles premieres. It was the first one because I was meeting John Riley, who was the guy I was with at the time. I was meeting him there. So my mother said, I'll drive you into town because we lived in Hampstead. Well, you can imagine the mob scene at Leicester Square, can't you?
Mm.
And my sister was in the car as well. And apparently, just as they'd dropped me off, they were side by side with the Beatles car.
Oh.
And I think my sister burst into tears with the emotion of it all. I think. But we were worlds apart at that age.
In the next episode of She's with the Band, Sue shares how a chance demo led to discovering a future music legend, her short-lived singing career, and how she found her passion, sealing deals as a top talent agent.
She's with the band.